Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to our session today on Innovating Healthcare with Red Hat Integration Technology. So we're going to talk about our integration technology and how it applies to healthcare. And we've got a tremendous use case with Sutter Health that we're going to go over today. We're going to start off by introducing the speakers. They're going to introduce themselves. We're going to get a view of healthcare from a strictly interoperability standpoint, what's driving healthcare from interoperability. Why does healthcare need to innovate? Then we're going to drill down a little bit into the Fuse product, how's it helping the speed of integration. And then our folks from Sutter are going to talk about their use case, how they're using the product, which I think you'll find very interesting. And then at the end, we'll have a question and answer session. So should be a good session. Hope you all enjoy it. But let me start off with a view of healthcare from interoperability. And what I'm going to talk about is some of the trends in healthcare. And there's a lot of trends in healthcare, and I want to focus on the ones that are driving interoperability. So real quickly, some of the trends in healthcare, everybody's trying to reduce costs because of the Affordable Care Act. People are trying to have systems that can scale. There's tons of mergers and acquisitions. You have payers that are becoming health systems that are becoming payers. There's all kinds of weird arrangements happening. Security is on top of everybody's mind. You've got government compliance, you've got data that's just exploding. But if you focus down on the interoperability pieces, these are the things here in red that are driving interoperability. And I'll cover those. The first thing is population health. For those of you who don't really understand what, in a simple version, population health is having information on an entire population of patients to understand how to change your protocols, what you can do, and things you can make and changes you can make to manage that population better. If you think about that, the only way to do that is to get data, and you've got to get data from everywhere. So you've got to get data from all kinds of points, and the only way you're going to get that data is from interoperability. There's a transformation happening with digital innovation, things like wearables, things like telemedicine, even things like genomics. This is starting to come about as we see more and more of that happen. Again, that's going to be part of the interoperability equation too. The two things I want to focus on is value-based care, first of all. And for those of you who aren't that familiar with healthcare, just to describe value-based care simply, what value-based care is a switch from what was fee-for-service. So fee-for-service is very easy. I mean, if you're an orthopedic surgeon and you do an operation on a knee, an ACL surgery, if you do 10 of them, you make $5,000 a piece. The doctor makes $50,000. If he does 20, the math's easy. Under value-based care, the world changes. So if that same orthopedic surgeon does 10 knees, he may only get $3,500 for those knees. The remaining $1,500 is based on outcomes. Outcomes, how do you get outcomes? Well, from a knee example, I mean, how much physical therapy do they have to do? Did they have to go back and get another MRI? Did they have to have injections of cortisone, of some kind of animal fat in their knees? Did they have to go back in for surgery? What kind of medicine do they have? All those things are all different touch points. So to be able to do value-based care, you've got to have all that information coming in. You've got to see those touch points. And that world doesn't exist right now in healthcare. And the last thing is this interoperability dependence, and we talk about meaningful use, and I'll explain what meaningful use is, how that's driving it as well. But if you look at the interoperability things, there's a couple pieces of technology that we have, and we're going to focus today on Fuse, but there's also, with Fuse, we have a rules engine, and we also have a business process engine, which is absolutely critical to doing value-based care and the interoperability that has to happen. So we'll drill down on those later on today. The first thing is what people always ask me. They ask me, is this stuff here to stay? Is value-based care here to stay? Is meaningful use? Is that really driving things? And my opinion is, yes, it is. And let me explain to you why. This is from CMS, and if you look at this data over here, I'll point you to the darker circles. If you look at the darker circles, it's stage 3 and 4. I won't explain what those are. We don't have time today. But let's just say 3 and 4 need a lot more interoperability. So if you look at 2014 to 2016, it's pretty much stayed the same. If you look going out to 2018, which is a year and a half away, it almost doubles. So all of a sudden now it's getting to be something that's real. And if that's a goal from CMS and they're actually achieving the goals they set and they're ahead of them. So that tells me that it's not going away anytime soon. And I think if you look at value-based care, what does that have to do with interoperability? I've got a lot of things up here, but let me point to a couple of them. With value-based care, you have new processes and you have integrated flows of data and processes that you have to have. So you have to get all this data that doesn't exist now from all these different points to be able to set the contracts, to pay on these contracts, and figure out what protocols you need to do. It just changes the world of healthcare. The other thing is most of what is needed to do value-based care doesn't exist. No one's got it. So they're all trying to build it, and they've got to build it really fast. And the last thing is you have to have an open environment, because if you think about, to be able to do this value-based care thing, you have to have interoperability, you have to have integration, you have to get all this information to be able to do it. So everything has to work together, and the more open it is and the more flexible it is, the easier it is to do it. The next thing I think is driving all this interoperability is meaningful use. And what meaningful use is the federal government gave each physician $44,000 apiece to install an electronic medical record. More to it than that, but that's the first stage. So what they did is they went out and everybody has started to install these electronic medical records. At this point, they're pretty much in place. What you have going on now is stage 2 and stage 3. So stage 2 is support for patient access to their information, the beginning of it. You have bi-directional communication. This is where it starts to get hard. In stage 2, you have people that are already having problems hitting stage 2. Stage 3 even gets more difficult. If you guys were in the keynote yesterday and Jim Whitehurst was talking about open healthcare, it's changing healthcare on its head to go more patient-centric, where the patients can now take charge of their self-management tools and things like that. So the reason this is so important is there's a penalty phase now. So if you don't achieve these stages, you start to get penalized and it costs you money. So I look at it, if I look at value-based care and I look at the meaningful use, there's money in the game. So before, people talked about, oh, we have to integrate, we have to share data, but there was no skin in the game, there was no money. Now with value-based care, if you can't do it, you're not going to get paid, you're going to be left out of the healthcare market altogether if you can't figure out how to do this. And with meaningful use, you're going to start to get penalized. So that's why I say this stuff's here to stay, and people are really serious about it. So what you're left with now to try to do all this interoperability stuff, you have one gigantic mess. You have physicians that have to go out to hospitals, go out to labs, go out to payers, need to talk to patients. Patients are doing the same thing. If I start to add the Internet of Things on top of it with wearables, it gets to be an absolute mess. And the products out there right now are not designed to be able to handle this very effectively. So basically, if you put it in a nutshell, what does IT need to be able to make these changes, to be able to do what has to be done for interoperability? Well, first of all, they've got to do this stuff really fast, because this stuff, as I said, didn't exist anymore. So they've got to do it in light speed. Healthcare is not a light speed group. They've always been known to lag behind, so it's a different paradigm shift. They've got to do it at the lowest possible cost. Pretty simple. I mean, no one's getting any bigger budgets, and they have this whole new thing they have to figure out how to do. And so they've got to figure out how to do with what they already have. So they've got to do more with less. They've got to be agile. They've got to be able to scale so they can enter these different partnerships. They need to be able to scale, to be able to do all this interoperability. They need to do everything they possibly can to make it easier to integrate and connect. Can't lock themselves in, and they got to do it securely. So I guess to summarize, the current technology state can't handle the future direction. So change is required to be able to do what's coming down the pipe. And there's no turning back. So I'll turn it over to Zohaib, and we can talk some more about healthcare trends.
Thank you, Greg. So my name is Zohaib Khan, and I'm a practice lead at Red Hat Consulting, and I help customers, implement technologies and solve business problems. I've spent 5 years in healthcare before coming to Red Hat, and 9 years in capital markets. So I have been on the customer side of the fence for a long time. What I wanted to talk about today, by the way, everybody attended yesterday's keynote, Jim Whitehurst? Okay. So that kind of sets the tone for our talk, frankly. So the biggest thing that we are dealing with and within our enterprise is whether you are healthcare or not. Let's say you are supply chain, you are FSI, whatever vertical you are. The biggest dilemma that we face today is we have our resources, but they are locked in. 70% of the resources are dedicated to keeping the lights on, running the technology, right? And it only leaves 30% of the room to do the innovation, do the new work, and provide the new business value to the customers. Why is it important? Because frankly, this is the paradigm that we all face and struggle with. And if new mandates like healthcare come in, then we are only left with the 30% of resources to give us the new things. This is becoming a great problem for the industry in general, right? And healthcare more so. So this is the paradigm we live in, and this is the reality right now. What we need is a way to change things and in order to innovate faster. There are two things in the enterprise, especially healthcare. Most of our data is locked into our legacy systems. And what I mean by that is, if you look at a legacy system, essentially there are two things that are in there. One is the data that you have accumulated over a period of time. So, mainframe systems are still around, carrying DB2 data, patient records, stuff like that. We have customer data, booking data, whatever. So that's in there, and it's not going anywhere. The other thing that we have is there's a functionality that is also logged into your legacy systems. So if you are in a paradigm where you have systems around for several years, and suddenly you are required to make changes, let's say somebody wants to go mobile, right? Mobile first strategy. You scramble to change the technology and start to build stuff, but problem is that most of our stuff is locked in. The data is locked into the legacy, and the functionality is locked into the legacy as well. So this gives us few options in terms of how to proceed. So in terms of the first step to modernize our infrastructure and ability to deliver is, first we have to unlock our assets, unlock the data, and unlock the functionality, right? And that's where, frankly, the integration technologies come in. There are 3 different approaches that you can take based on my experience that I've seen in the industry. The first one is you can literally lift and shift, which means that you can take the existing system, it's well architected, if it's well written, and start to containerize it or put it in the cloud-based technologies. That's number one. That's pretty straightforward, but we know that only 10% or maybe 5% of the systems are going to fall in that category, right? The second one is you augment with new functionality. So you keep your existing system where it is, but then you create some integration points into that system and then build the new layer on top of it. And frankly, this is what we have done part of number 1 and number 2 in Sutter, and that's what Aaron is going to talk about today with us with a real life example. And the third option for us is to rewrite. And all of these options have some cost associated with that. And we have to get ready for massive integrations. So if we are not thinking about, let's say, transforming in a certain way, then, as Craig said, this is coming and the changes will be upon us, and you will not be ready to make that change and harness the true potential. So I'm just going to give you a view of what are the enabling technologies and what the landscape looks like. So in terms of integration choices, forward-looking next 5 to 10 years, you have to go towards the API-based integration, and we have a technology, JBoss Fuse, that is going to allow you to do that. We also made an acquisition recently, 3Scale, which gives Red Hat the capability to give you the API technology, API gateway as a first-class technology now. So we have a full suite of technology available to you. The next thing that is going to be important is for you to architect your systems in such a way that they are targeted services, purpose-based services. Rather than writing monolithic systems, it has to be written in a microservices based. So using containers or some kind of a PaaS technology like OpenShift is going to be important. The third important thing is mobile integration. So there's a use case, for example, if you are in healthcare and if you want to open up your waiting room times, for example, if somebody wants to come to a hospital and they want to figure out, what is the waiting room time in different hospitals for a specialty care or let's say ER. Wouldn't it be nice to just pick up an app and just open it up and say, okay, what are the waiting room times in different hospitals around the region? And then you can make your choice to go there. That's where the world is heading. And if you are in a position to make that happen, then this is where you will get more customers, frankly. There are several other use cases that are becoming available as we proceed, but mobile is going to be the key moving forward. And the fourth thing is cloud enablement. So more and more partners and more software as a service platforms are becoming available. Everybody's collaborating with the data, and especially with Open Healthcare Initiative, as it starts to take root, there will be a need to collaborate based on, patient information, still keeping the privacy, but, publishing the data. So the cloud technologies are going to be very important. So these are the four trends that I see very common, and this is what the healthcare industry is heading towards. And if you feel like you are either not looking at them or you're not thinking, I think healthcare is getting disrupted pretty quickly, so this is going to be the key to the future. I'll have Sudhir come and talk about Red Hat portfolio and how it translates into those four things.
All right, thank you. Hi, my name is Sudhir Chekka. I'm a senior solutions architect with Red Hat. I've been with Red Hat for about 4 years plus. And I focus on the middleware technologies and cloud technologies from Red Hat perspective. I work pretty closely with the customers, and also as part of the job, I try to get the customers up here to present their perspective of the Red Hat technologies and how they've implemented. So from a healthcare perspective, interoperability is pretty cumbersome, right? Because like everybody mentioned here, is they deal with multiple variety of applications, right? All the way from legacy applications, like mainframe-based applications, maybe homegrown custom web applications, and also adopting progressively much more modern applications, APIs, and even healthcare equipment devices that communicate with it. So interoperability is a challenge when you're dealing with this different systems up here. And there's been a recent study where they've estimated that medical interoperability itself could save about $30 billion per year for the US healthcare system. And JBoss Fuse, our integration platform, is trying to address these issues, right? So it's essentially a robust, open source based integration platform, focusing on an extensive coverage for integration and high performance messaging, and also providing you a scalable and a highly available environment for these perspective. So a couple of things I want to highlight from the integration platform itself is it provides an extensive coverage from an integration perspective, and it's based on a technology called Apache Camel, right? So it leverages enterprise integration patterns, the standard integration patterns, and it comes with about 150 plus connectors, various connectors. And these connectors are pretty helpful when you're connecting with third-party applications or APIs, different file systems, protocols, and also helps your development team not having to deal with writing extensive plumbing or a boilerplate code, and makes it much faster from a integration perspective. And of course that's going to help you with faster time to market. And also from a regulatory perspective, they're evolving a lot of different standards. So you want to be able to adopt those regulatory changes from an integration perspective much faster, right? And so one of the connectors from a healthcare perspective we support is for HL7 itself. So there is a default, there is a out-of-the-box HL7 connector that helps talk HL7, the parsers and everything. And so that itself won't solve the problem because there are different versions of the HL7 protocol, and different vendors implement a different way. The interpretations are different, so that makes it a little bit more complicated. So the Fuse itself, provides you, in addition to the HL7 connectors, provides you like data formatters and transformers. Things like you want to be able to marshal and unmarshal different format, and you want to map different data sources. It makes it much easier from that perspective. And the second thing is the messaging itself, right? So it's like based on Apache ActiveMQ. It's pretty robust and lightweight, messaging platform, and it provides you with support for multiple protocols like JMS and AMQP, which is wire level protocol standard that supports out of the box with this messaging platform. And also the third thing here is MQTT. So that's a protocol typically used in these emerging architectures, such as a mobile machine-to-machine kind of a connectivity or IoT kind of applications. And so JBoss Fuse is not only providing these things in a standalone environment, so it extends all these capabilities into a cloud kind of environment, because all these are healthcare systems are now moving to that. So again, there have been studies where 80% of the clinical data is going to pass through the cloud environment by 2020. That was an IDC study recently. And so Red Hat's container application platform is an OpenShift. So if you've seen the Bart Sutter's keynote demo this morning, so we were actually showing you a demo how all these applications, the middleware technologies, can work in a cloud kind of environment. And JBoss Fuse extends all these capabilities onto the container application platform itself. And so the integration platform is more than a typical ESP. It also provides you capabilities to implement modern architectures such as microservices, like Zohab mentioned, and also IoT kind of applications, right? So with microservices, essentially you get to host the application as form of set of service, right? So it provides you a capability to be able to implement these microservices where you could scale up, scale back in these individual applications. There are certain principles like how you can make the endpoint still smart and make the pipes dumb. So JBoss Fuse provides you these capabilities where you can implement all these principles much faster, which makes you do the deployments much faster too. One last thing I want to cover here is so JBoss Fuse itself, it can easily integrate with other middleware technologies too. So like, for example, if you want to implement like a complicated or a sophisticated decision management system, or you want to automate some process management, we can easily plug in like a BRMS or BPM, which is our rules management system, and a business process management system. We can plug into this and implement these things in real time. Okay, so let me turn it over to Aaron.
How's everybody doing? So I'm Aaron Peterson. I'm an engineer at Sutter Health. You may notice on your agendas that Byron Kilburn was supposed to be here. He unfortunately got sick, so I'm going to fill in, so please bear with me. So at Sutter, we were using JCAPS, Oracle's JCAPS, and they end-of-lifed it. So we got into a situation where we had to migrate off the engine and onto a new engine. So with that, we had to migrate our 250 applications that we integrate with to make sure that the new engine was able to connect with them. We also had 1,200 plus MMLP connections that we had to bring over as well to make sure they all stayed up and running. And that included over 2,000 routes. And for Sutter, what we define a route as is full transition through the engine from endpoint to endpoint. So why we selected Fuse in the end is, one, it was based on open source technology. So that we felt that would give us the ability to go ahead and future-proof us so that we didn't have to do any of these major migrations again in the future. Another reason was that it was near copy and paste from our existing code to the and that engine to the new engine. So that helped eliminate a lot of time being wasted on having to rewrite code, and it also allowed us to stay within the Java environment and the Java world. Plus, we were able to reuse some of our OTDs from JCAPS. That allowed us to focus more on validations and testing. Another point that we went with was the high availability and the failover we ended up gaining because we went with able to go with an active-active deployment, gave us near instantaneous failover, which in healthcare, that's really what you're looking for because you don't want the application to be down because that could affect your patient care. And the way we did that with Sutter is we ended up doing pairing all of our layers. So when the transactions came in, we paired those containers with active-active, utilizing the exclusive consumers and virtual topics in ActiveMQ. And then we also paired the translation layer so we could translate the data so that it can go downstream to whichever application it came in, or that it needs to go down to. And then the last one was it also gave us the ability to incorporate the DevOps best practices, which we weren't previously utilizing. So just to touch on the timeline that we had to deal with, in January of 2014, we started to do the review of the product after we were informed from Oracle that Oracle JCAPS was going to be end of life. And then by October 2014, we finally got through the approval process through the company to go ahead and start our POC. And so we ended up building up an environment and starting to transition the code in December of 2014. And while we were transitioning the code, we were also building out the new environment to prove out that concept. By January 2015, we were able to start validating and testing. So it was only about a month's time that we were able to go from nothing to validating and testing because of that copy and paste feature or functionality that we were able to gain by utilizing open source technology. In March of 2015, we were able to give the recommendation to the company and the executives that we would like to move forward with Red Hat Fuse. And then after that, then we had to go through the process of going through all the corporate hoops to jump through. At that same time, we were rebuilding our entire environment, so we were ordering brand new hardware to come in as well, and we were able to start with our very first go live by December of 2015. And by the end of February of 2017, we'll be completely migrated off from JCAPS and over onto Red Hat Fuse. Some of the challenges that we came up to with the migration was the ActiveMQ performance from going from the POC to the brand new hardware in the production environment. We ended up having to do a lot of work with the Red Hat support and the Red Hat engineers, and we were able to make a series of performance improvements to the settings of ActiveMQ on the new UCS hardware in order to maintain the throughput that we needed. Another challenge was being able to scale out Fabric. We ran into some issues because of our environment and how large our containers were, or how many containers we had in the environment, where Git wasn't able to sync up fast enough. So working with Red Hat support and their engineers, we were able to figure out the tuning and the settings that we needed to tweak just enough to make sure that Git was replicating across properly and that Fabric was able to keep up. We had a very truncated timeline in order to get moved off from the system, and again, by going back to the Java, the cut and paste, we were able to reuse those JCAPS OTDs, which saved us a lot of time and helped keep our development effort to a minimum. And then monitoring Fuse, that was probably our biggest pain point. We had evaluated the JBoss operational network, or John, But it's recommended with the product that not to scrape all the logs. So there's a bug that at the time we couldn't wait for the fix because of that truncated timeline, we had to really push forward. So we ended up utilizing Splunk for log scraping and then feeding into our alert system based on the logs, and feeding in all of our broker statistics and advisory message into Splunk as well, so we could keep an eye on what the brokers were doing. So just to touch on our future plans a little bit on where we're headed down with Sutter and with our DevOps is, so again, we're trying to complete our migrations by January of 2017 because that's when JCAPS is end of life, so we have to be off that hardware base because of internal, we have to be on supported hardware at all times. We're also helping build a service catalog to help align with ITIL best practices. I know ITIL's an evil word, but we have to do that. And it's helping us also build part of the migration for the future is going to build just, rather than integrating with all 250 applications and having to build different routes for each of those, we're going to build a standard set of routes, and it's going to be more of a take it or leave it kind of environment. And if you need the customization, we can do that, but that'll be at an additional cost. Another big feature that we're going to be working on in the future is some of the API creations. Now that we're utilizing, after a big Epic upgrade in October 2015, so we're going to be working with Red Hat to develop out some Fire resource APIs. And I'll let Zohab go ahead and talk about the modernization.
Yeah, so one thing that was important during this migration was when we came into Sutter, it was a traditional development environment, so there was no CI/CD type of environment that existed. So we actually recommended that when you start adopting open source technology like Fuse, it would help to have some kind of a best practice in terms of continuously releasing and continuously integrating that. So in terms of that, we created an entire infrastructure based on Jenkins pipelines, Git-based releases, and also the Artifactory-based repository, right? So that gave Sutter a very good leverage in terms of going from starting point to finish and cut down the time to delivery significantly. So what was your experience like in terms of delivery times? What did you see?
We were able to turn around with all the routes. I think we did, for our West Bay region, we had 360 plus routes we were able to turn around in a couple of weeks' time, where it would have taken us several months before that.
So we shaved like months into weeks or even days. That's the value that we were able to add as part of the professional services, working with these guys. And just, can you give us a sense of the volume of data that flows through this, just so that people can get an idea?
I think we're, depending on the region, we do upward of 50 million transactions a day, or I think it is.
Okay, so coming from JCAPS and going into this, the biggest concern that these guys had was how can we handle volume, and that volume is going to grow with more integrations and with more sites coming online. So this is something that we were able to achieve and expand on as part of this delivery. So,
great.
So we can open for questions.
Yeah, let me come on, grab some. Yeah, just, I don't know if you guys know about Sutter and their size. They're probably a top 10 health system in the United States. So they're very, very large. So someone taking this initiative to do this with Fuse really proves the technology, and it's a pretty big undertaking. So, most people when they try this undertaking will probably have something maybe even a smaller scale than you guys do, but we started big. So what everybody introduced themselves, I didn't introduce myself, which is the second session in a row I forgot to introduce everybody. So, what are you going to do? But I'm Craig Klein. I'm the Director of Healthcare for Red Hat, so I'm responsible for Red Hat's healthcare business. I've been in healthcare for 36 years, so I've seen a lot of stuff. But I spend my time out with, all the largest entities within healthcare, seeing what they're doing well, what they're not doing well, what's working, what's not. a use case like this at Sutter is just absolutely phenomenal, and it's what people need to see, because as I talked about interoperability, it's just going to get bigger and bigger and more complicated, and to have someone like you guys to be able to set a gold standard, I think is great. So, yep. I'd like to open up for questions. So if anybody's got any questions, we've got a microphone and we'll bring it around. And
hi, my name is Asif. So we're in the similar boat. We have JCAPS. We're doing Fuse implementation. Can you speak a little bit about the copy and paste? So you summarize it, but can you give us a peek into it? How did you do it?
I think Josh is more. He actually works with Sutter as well, and he's more on the development side.
I'm one of the solution architects at Sutter Health. So before we, when we were going from JCAPS 5.1.3 to JCAPS 6.3, we took that opportunity to kind of get all of our code into a J2EE standard. So once we got all that code into that standard, we were able to take that code and just build the camel routes straight with that. So the camel routes would call those beans, and they would do all the processing. We were also able to take the OTDs to keep the existing parsing and unmarshalling and put those directly into as a dependency to our new code in Fuse.
So let me add a little bit more color on that. One of the things that we saw with JCAPS was when you do XSLT type of transformations, what you have to do is write the transformations and also the end result of that separately. But with Fuse, it gives you that XSLT processor right in line. So you can literally take your XSLT templates and just funnel your data through it, and it will process that very quickly. So in a sense, you can, all the assets that you already have, you can easily port them over into the Fuse environment, and it will just leverage them as they are, even the Java classes that you have. So that's the biggest hurdle in adopting new technology. That was the copy-paste side of the things.
Let's talk about, we have one JCD that has one database OTD and COBOL copybook OTD, and we are in 5.1.3 U2, like Java CAPS. So what would be the migration path like?
So there are two things that you can do. COBOL copybook, we have done it with one customer. What we have done is we took the COBOL copybook and converted it into the Java classes. So there is a Java converter that we use. So the first step is we transform the COBOL copybook code into the Java classes. It gives you the data structure. And then we build the transformations on top of it. We also incorporate something called BRMS technology. So you can write the rules of transformation. So JBoss Fuse basically helps you with the integration side. But when it comes to implementing the processing and the rules, that's where we use the BRMS. So there are essentially two steps. You take the code of the COBOL, convert it into Java using the Java converter. And once you have that code, then you can craft whatever rules that you have for processing. That's what we have done with a very large healthcare company recently. Yeah, so I mean, a lot of times if you are moving from Java to Java, chances are that you will get 80%, 90% copy paste. But when you're moving from something like COBOL or some other languages, there is a little bit of work that goes in. But the really point is that we make it easy for you to adapt that. So yeah, I agree that it's not going to be 100% copy paste in that respect, but you will be able to get started very quickly and be able to deliver it faster. I think there was, okay.
Hi, my name is Dennis Park. I'm from UPS. We're a current user of JBoss Fuse, but I was very interested in how other industries and companies are using JBoss Fuse. This is more implementation question. Do you between the XML-based and Java-based, which do you prefer using or have used in your the 1200 routes that you have developed?
So we created our camel routes with a lot of them are very similar. So we created a route builder class and just using declarative services feed the settings for each individual route that it's going to stand up. And so we stayed mostly away from the XML. There are a few times that we've used XML-based camel routes, but for the most part, they're all Java-based.
I think there's one question over there.
So getting back to the OTDs, so I'm picturing like the HL7 OTDs or maybe the X12 OTDs. So how did you get those into Java classes to use? Like, did you use the SCF files, or what did you do to make that happen?
So we have native integration support for HL7 now, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I don't think that you convert the OTDs directly. Like when you are exchanging data with HL7, it's usually the data exchange format that you have to understand and be able to process. So I think in your case, it was like you were still continuing to get that data from the HL7, if I understand correctly, Aaron?
I mean, it sounded like you said you were using those OTDs in Fuse.
Yeah.
So, Josh?
Josh, right.
So yeah, we use the existing OTDs. We import the jars of the OTD, and so it still has the same parsing. The object names change in the Java classes. So that was the main change with the copy paste. Was we've got the new Java classes and just changed the object name of the OTD because it was importing that jar, and so we were able to reuse exactly what the OTD was doing in JCAPS. No. Right now, we did keep the JCAPS repository for the sole purpose of holding our OTDs. And so we do go back into the JCAPS editor to modify those. But for the most part, our OTDs are very static. We don't have very many changes to them right now. So yeah, exactly. So we have pretty much every permutation, and that is the one unsupported piece that we have left. And from what I understand, Red Hat is working on looking into building their own, basically, objects to replace OTDs.
Yep.
No, actually, it ended up being a fairly simple answer. Just the get timeout. So it's still as chatty, but what was happening is with as many many containers that we had that had to sync up, it was taking more than 5 seconds, what the default is, for it to sync up with Git. So if it failed, that container would be out of sync, and then if the Git master failed over to that, then it would just be a really bad thing. And just increasing that timeout was the main thing that fixed it. Yeah.
So the reason we had that timeout issue is we have over 240 containers in our production environment. And in our QA environment, we have over 480. So having to sync up with the way that Fuse and Fabric work with Git is every container keeps a local copy in case they lose contact with Zookeeper on the Ensemble members. So we were, by all that replication out to all of those containers, that's where we were hitting that timeout out. So just increasing that so that we were just over that threshold of where they were timing out at, that seems to have solved a lot of that. So we have, in production, we have 5 Ensemble members that are hosting all of those containers, and we have, I think about 36 to 40 servers that are running all the containers. We range between 6 and 10 containers per server.
One of the things that I got surprised coming to Sutter was these guys did not use VM, so it's running on bare metal UCS hardware, which is kind of phenomenal because typically everybody deploys on VMs, but these guys went bare metal. So that was something different that I saw.
Yeah, it's bare metal. We have 5 Ensemble servers that just run the ensembles. And then each region, we have 6 regions. And each of those have 6 servers in each. So we're running about 42, 43 servers in each environment. And then in our QA environment, we only have 3 Ensemble members, the same amount of servers, well, minus 2 servers, but we have double the amount of containers because we have one set as our QA environment, and then we have another set that's actually mirroring our production, which we call our parallel environment. I think, do we expand the number of servers going into Fuse, but I think we chose to do that just based on our implementation and how many transactions we were going to be doing.
So there were 2 things at play, right? Number one is the migration itself, like for like. But what was also happening was the data volume and the number of transactions was also growing. So they were already hitting the limit on the JCAPS, and that was already about to be expanded. So we did 2 things. One is the like-for-like migration. So these guys use Cisco UCS hardware, whereas JCAPS was, I don't think it was UCS, right?
No, it was, I want to say it was HP, but I could be wrong.
Right. So that was one thing. And then when coming to Fuse, there was a lot more data and a lot more data volume that they had to deal with. So it was not a light comparison. So there was a lot more data now flowing through those Fuse pipes.
Yeah, and even though we did have to increase our server footprint, it was more erring on the side of caution. Right now we look at our CPU usage, memory usage, all that, and we're barely scratching the surface. So we could have put a lot more on those, but we're just erring on the side of caution.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned that you are using Jenkins pipelines. So is that compatible with Fuse 6.1? And I studied it still on 6.1.
We're actually
6.2.
We're on 6.2 in production. We're getting ready to do the 6.2.1 migration, which we're just going to end up standing up right next to the current environment and then just migrating everything over at that point. But I haven't seen any issues with the Jenkins pipeline, but that pushes all of our stuff into Artifactory.
So it's compatible with 6.1 and 6.2?
I think 6.2 is
Yeah, Jenkins was working even with 6.1
Yeah,
and
so-
6.2, of course, the future versions, right?
So there are 2 things, right? Advisory messages. So we have a reference architecture available for your consumption if you want, how to stand up a dedicated ActiveMQ infrastructure. These guys were using in a very specific manner where they have brokers deployed on every server. So every server that gets built with the UCS has the messaging component, the camera routes, and also the endpoint delivery. And they replicate this entire infrastructure across several servers, right? Which basically does not, they're not required to do cross-broker crosstalk, right? So that's number one. But if you have an environment in which you have, the network of brokers set up, for example, there is a reference architecture that we publish that you can take into account. Now, coming back to your question is the performance thing was related to the virtual topics that these guys were using. So, if you understand virtual topics, basically it's like the store and forward kind of methodology. So you have the topic and then you relay it to the different queues. And there is an element of persistence that happens in between. So what was happening was there were some delays that we were seeing initially when we started testing in QA. So we had to go in and tweak the KahaDB stuff underneath to make sure that the way they were using the virtual topics was in line with what we recommend. So there was a lot of work that went to support that.
And we just published the advisory messages into Splunk, and I believe we do timestamps with those.
Yeah, that's.
So I did that with another customer, BPEL migration. So if you are you BPEL 1.1 compliant or BPEL 2? Okay, so it's 1.1. So in BPEL 1.1, you have to do 2 things. One is the actual extraction of the data and also the workflow that happens. So you have to write both of the things. With BPEL 2, we can support BPEL 2 in Fuse. And we really separate those 2 concerns for you, so you don't have to write the extraction logic anymore. Fuse routes, camel routes can do that for you. So that frees you up from implementing the actual business processing logic in your Java classes or whatever. So from the migration perspective, it's actually better coming from JCAPS to Fuse in terms of BPEL. We did that with a very large customer a year ago. So, it was a very success. Yep.
So I know you guys mentioned that you're using Splunk for your logging, your log monitoring and whatnot. Can you talk a little bit about what your log monitoring and error management strategy was in the legacy JCAPS platform?
Basically the same, except we had to, so we like to joke at Sutter because we had tested out John from JBoss, and we have a guy named Dave that wrote all of our monitoring for JCAPS. So we tell everybody we have Dave as our monitoring. So he basically just wrote all the
Perl script, right?
Right. all Perl came from HP, and he wrote all the scripts that actually scraped all the logs off of all the servers for JCAPS, and basically did the same thing. So he was able to utilize a lot of that because now he was just able to pull that as Splunk. And Splunk just consolidates all of our logs, so we don't have to go out to each container to pull each container's logs. It's just all right there in Splunk, so we just do a Splunk query.
Do you guys deal with any custom HL7 messages? Meaning not a standard V6 or any of those, someone coded it itself?
All the time?
Yeah. So Sutter for the longest time was doing best of breed with all its applications. And so, yes, there's an HL7 standard, but nobody follows that standard. Custom Z segments, all kinds of custom set, builds. Things aren't necessarily in the right order. And luckily, over the years of having JCAPS, we got OTDs built for all of those. And yeah, they work very well in Fuse as well.
How are we doing?
So we use right now we're using NETI4 for the encoding. We do use Camel HL7, but we also use the OTDs. One of the problems with Camel HL7 is it relied on Happy, and Happy is way too strict. And so we had to strip Happy out of it. So we do still use the Camel HL7 library, but with very little, and with Happy stripped out.
This is probably more of a question for the healthcare head. So is there plans, I guess we were talking about fire, so you're working with HL7 on that, and also with just, I think there might even be Happy for fire now too or something, but are you looking at making it extendable like the HL7 whatever implementation that we moving forward?
Yeah, so right now, so that's in the roadmap right now. So the next version of JBoss Fuse, it's going to start supporting the fire protocol.
And also HL7 too, because that's not going to go away.
Yes, it's going to continue, exactly. So that's exactly. So like I said, there are like so many connectors, JBoss Fuse connectors. We're going to add additional connector for fire support.